Tuesday, September 4. Troas. After the riot that we read about in Acts 19:23-41, Paul resolved to leave Ephesus, but he took an extended detour through Macedonia and Achaia instead of going straight to Jerusalem, as we read in Acts 20 verses 1-3. On this journey, representatives of some Gentile churches were with him, we read in verse 4. Question. Read Acts 20 verses 7-12. What's wrong with the common argument that these verses help prove the Sabbath was changed to Sunday? Acts 20 beginning at verse 7. On the first day of the week we came together to break bread. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, kept on talking until midnight. There were many lamps in the upstairs room where we were meeting. Seated in a window was a young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. When he was sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the third floor and was picked up dead. Paul went down, threw himself on the young man, and put his arms around him. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "He's alive." Then he went upstairs again and broke bread and ate. After talking until daylight, he left. The people took the young man home alive and were greatly comforted. Paul's stopover in Troas ended with a church meeting on the first day of the week, it said in verse 7. They gathered together to break bread, which probably refers to the Lord's Supper, with or without the fellowship meal that often was combined with it, since the early days of the Jerusalem church, as we read in Acts 2:42 and 46. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. That there's no mention of a cup nor of any prayers does not rule out this possibility. The point, however, is that this episode often is mentioned as evidence that in Paul's time, at least Gentile churches already had replaced Sabbath with Sunday as a day of worship. Yet, before making such a claim, it is necessary to establish the precise day on which the meeting took place, as well as the nature of the meeting. The reference to the use of lights in verse 8, together with the fact that Paul's message continued until midnight in verse 7, and then until daybreak in verse 11, not to mention the deep sleep of Eutychus in verse 9, makes it clear it was a night meeting. The question, though, is whether it was the night before Sunday or the night after Sunday. The answer depends on what system of time reckoning Luke is using, whether the Jewish system from sundown to sundown, or the Roman one from midnight to midnight. If it is the former, then it was Saturday night. In case of the latter, it was Sunday night. Either way, the context of Acts 20 verses 7-12 indicates that even if the meeting was on a Sunday night, it was not a regular church meeting, but a special one due to Paul's departure the following morning. It is hard to see, then, how this isolated and exceptional episode affords support for Sunday keeping. The fact is, it doesn't. And so to finish today, dwell more on all the reasons for the validity of keeping the seventh-day Sabbath. How does the powerful biblical support for the Sabbath help affirm us in our identity as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, and the calling that we have been given to spread the three angels' messages to the world?